Welcome to this week's lecture. This week's lecture actually travels through an arc of various topics that are current ethical issues that advertisers and marketers are actually challenged by today. Some of the topics include greenwashing and corporate sustainability, the first topic of our title slide. The latter half of the lecture includes talking about diversity marketing and gender and sex-based marketing strategies. Now, these issues have actually been issues for some time now, but still actually remain a topic of current and very controversial debate within the industry today. So let's begin, of course, and always by defining our terms, starting with corporate sustainability, a term which many of you must be familiar with. Corporate sustainability is actually a business approach that creates long-term consumer as well as employee value by creating a quote-unquote green strategy. Now, this green strategy is actually aimed towards the natural environment and taking into consideration every dimension of how a business operates in the social, cultural, as well as an economic environment. It also formulates strategies to build a company that fosters longevity through transparency. We've talked about transparency before, and proper employee development. Now, as we discussed in previous lectures, the ethics of a company, particularly the green or sustainable ethics of a company, are becoming important issues in attracting and retaining talent in the Gen X as well as millennials in particular. For stockholders and shareholders alike, reporting on sustainability has actually become a vital way to quantify the green ethics of a company, and marketing is actually a great contributor to that. You may have noticed this trend throughout ads and marketing alike. Companies rebranding themselves as green companies, quoting sustainability statistics in their ads, and launching ad campaigns that advertise some of their most vital sustainability facts and figures to bring the company's ethics to the forefront. Now, doing this well as a company is to be commended, and a lot of companies are doing it well. Now, doing this poorly, on the other hand, which means that they're solely reliant on their marketing without the company operations and philosophy to back it up, is called greenwashing. So in our discussion of CSR, or corporate social responsibility, we discussed the new means of reporting, or quantifying the ethical efforts of a company that market the ethical value a company brings to its society. Now, the same is true for a company's sustainability efforts, whose reporting is also now becoming public as well as scrutinized by both shareholders and investors. Now, not only that, a positive report can also birth a large-scale ad or marketing campaign. So what are the challenges laden within reporting? The challenge for many businesses in this new field is to quantify the positive impacts of sustainability. Sustainability can increase revenue. It can also reduce energy expenses, reduce waste expenses, materials, water expenses. It can also increase employee productivity. It can reduce hiring, and it can reduce attrition expenses. And it can also reduce strategic as well as operational risks. And furthermore, sustainable business practice may attract talent and generate tax breaks at the very best. Now, we mentioned the triple bottom line, or the new bottom line, in previous lectures. Now, let's revisit this definition just to review. The triple bottom line is a concept used to assess an organization's success from three different perspectives. Of course, first and foremost, profit. The second, of course, is people, which we talked about with regard to CSR. And third is the planet, which is related to corporate sustainability. Now, with regard to reporting, this changes corporate reporting in all areas: economic, governance, social, ethical, as well as environmental. All of these performances are different because of this. Some other trends we are beginning to see because of this new style of reporting are, first and foremost, sustainability reporting is growing, obviously, although tools in this area are still in basically a novice state. Secondly, the CFO's role in sustainability is on the rise, as is that of the Chief Operations Officer. Next, employees emerge as a key stakeholder group for sustainability programs and reporting. And often, you'll find that a company's own employees begin sustainability efforts within a company as a labor of love or even a grassroots movement. And this may change the marketer's interest as also a human interest story as well. Next, the public and the media is also beginning to examine the full supply chain and is becoming increasingly aware of the scarcity of business resources in the long term. which makes for an interesting media scandal or story. And dangerous to PR as well. They're beginning to look at the company's future in determining their buying decisions. This affects, as media often does, our shareholders and our stockholders' view of the company itself. And lastly, rankings and ratings in the sustainability area are actually starting and beginning to matter to company executives more and more. Perhaps not at your company yet, but eventually you will see the trend further and further down the line. So why is the movement towards corporate sustainability so strong right now? Now, while it began actually in the U.S. in the 1970s, it is re-emerging now as a vital character builder to companies worldwide for some reasons. First, the ever-increasing erosion of public trust and investor confidence in sustainability of large businesses. People don't trust their companies. Second, the widening concern of social responsibility about environmental matters. Third, the overconsumption of natural resources. This is beginning to affect the consumer public. They are starting to care about their natural resources as it affects them, their children, their offspring, their future. All of these are beginning to matter and become personal. And lastly, the global government bailout of big businesses and the perception that government cannot solve all the problems of businesses. This is becoming important to a consumer public as it affects them individually. They're starting to redetermine their buying practices based on these matters. So as we mentioned before, shareholders are beginning to care a great deal about the triple bottom line, not just the bottom line, which includes CSR efforts as well as sustainability reports on top of profit, all on top of profit. And thus, as marketers, we are beginning to see sustainability marketing and CSR efforts. These are beginning to affect the profit of a company very deeply. And most important of all, these efforts need to be done with authenticity and transparency, albeit with strategy, which is where marketers are earning a seat at the boardroom table. Part of this grassroots opinions and movements are begun by social media, and customers can all have an opinion that affects your brand. We talked about this in a previous lecture, and it's innately public. Shareholders and stockholders alike are privy to these opinions. So the marketer's job must include ensuring these metrics and reporting, once they enter the realm of the campaign, are authentic and accurate to the company's vision and mission. However, what's in a sustainability and a CSR report? What are ethics KPIs or key performance indicators? Some examples, as listed on this page: donations of social expenses, right? How much a company gives to a certain cause. Descriptions of social and ethical activities on projects, diversity and equal opportunities, which we will talk about in later slides, fair wages, training and continuing education, opportunities to employees, employee diversity, including age, gender, ethnicity, etc., number of employees, turnover, hiring procedures, whistleblowing, employee productivity, employee and customer satisfaction and retention, fair competition, how truthful they are as a company, how transparent they are in their advertising. It's actually becoming a reporting mechanism. Fair suppliers, supplier satisfaction, political activities, etc. All of these are becoming laden in reporting and becoming important, very, very public and transparent things to a corporation. And marketers are part and parcel to that. So when a sustainability effort is not authentic and simply done under the smokescreen of marketing, it's actually labeled greenwashing. Now, greenwashing acts as a guise of real change and uses the public desire to see change that addresses the environment as an actual marketing ploy. Now, this is in place of real and actual company-wide change. And you see a few examples above, which use actually kitsch words like natural, pure, eco, and green in their labeling or in their marketing without the value of an explanation. Now, it's proven that customers have begun to pay more attention and automatically choose quote-unquote green labeled products, but without the actual education of understanding what this new labeling and branding means with regard to the company's sustainability output and efforts. Now, one example you see above is actually Shell Oil, whose ad shows a clear sky with the slogan "Zero Waste." We're going to talk about this in our next slide. So where does this unethical marketing in terms of greenwashing go bad? So when Shell Oil began to advertise its work in sustainability, it was widely scrutinized for being very, very inauthentic and was labeled as greenwashing. Now, counter-advertising groups began to run expose campaigns to uproot Shell's lack of transparency and their inauthenticity because they saw right through it. Now, the above is an example from Greenpeace called the Arctic Ready campaign, which was a reaction to the advertising campaigns Shell released while proposing Arctic drilling. This is an example of a well-known term of counter-advertising called guerrilla marketing, which is beginning to happen more and more when activist groups encounter unethical or inauthentic marketing campaigns. So as we saw in the Greenpeace campaign, unethical advertising can actually backfire. The consumer public does fight back to unethical marketing and advertising. Now, guerrilla or grassroots marketing groups will begin to produce campaigns against unethical brand advertising that gain traction in the media. So what is guerrilla marketing? It's important to be aware of it so you know it when you see it. Let's define it. Guerrilla marketing is an advertising strategy and concept designed for businesses to promote their products or services in an unconventional way with little budget to spend. And essentially, it's always done it with a grassroots in mind. This involves high energy, imagination, focusing on grasping the attention in the public in a more personal or memorable level. So doing the exact opposite of what they see an inauthentic, unethical company using their campaigns to do. So some other terms associated with guerrilla marketing are called subvertising, which is the practice of marketing parodies or of corporate or political ads. And this is usually done for the purpose of satire. And another term to describe this effort is called culture jamming, which is usually associated largely with the arts. Now I'd like you to take a minute now, if you have the time, and look through some of the examples on the above websites. They act as a great resource for these campaigns. So I'd like to take a minute now and actually shift gears a bit. Another one of the current ethical issues surrounding marketers today is called diversity marketing. Now, as we saw in some of the previous slides, negative consumer reactions stemmed out of a lack of understanding for what the consumer actually wants. Now, in the case of an issue that is so sensitive to the consumer public, like environmental issues, authenticity is vital. Now, diversity marketing birthed out of this same and very philosophy that not every consumer looks the same, acts the same, thinks the same, lives the same, and essentially is the same. And to better interact with the consumer on an authentic level, marketers began to design campaigns with the multicultural consumer public in mind. So let's define it. Diversity marketing actually recognizes the influence of cultural programming and acknowledges that different consumer groups have life experiences in different cultural and social settings. And because of this different cultural programming, the tastes, values, expectations, the beliefs, the ways people interact, the ways people are entertained, and lifestyle preferences of these groups tend to be different from others. Now, these differences actually require the creation of customized marketing strategies. Now, one acknowledgement of the importance of diversity marketing is actually rooted in AT&T currently. Now, currently AT&T has a post open for this exact discipline at the vice president level. That's a high level expectation for someone to handle the importance of diversity marketing. It's a huge validation that this is more than a cultural trend. So one well-known example of consumer backlash in this area of diversity marketing is Abercrombie & Fitch, a clothing company, and their ads have long been critiqued for featuring only white individuals of a certain look, age range, and size. Now the brand sought to brand itself as quote-unquote all-American, an all-American retailer without representing the diverse culture that was the American audience and the American experience. Because of this short-sightedness, the public perception of this discriminatory marketing soon filtered actually into their stores, and the clothing brand actually began to be critiqued for their hiring practices. Their hiring appeared to be whitewashed as well. The critiques began actually in the early 2000s, and since then has witnessed plunging share prices, as well as the resignation of their CEO, Mike Jeffries, who was actually forced to step down in December of 2006 after actually 22 years with the company. Brands that actually adapt, however, to understand the uniqueness of their audience and consumer base naturally produce a more profitable marketplace for their company. The marketer's position in the boardroom, as AT&T has already recognized, is to ensure that the diverse audience base is actually represented in their marketing and their advertising campaigns. Now, the repercussions can affect the economic positions of the company as well as the leadership and overall brand perception, as we've seen in the case with Abercrombie & Fitch. One brand well known for their ability to adopt the philosophy of diversity marketing is McDonald's. Now, their reporting on diversity hiring practice has actually become public knowledge. So not only do they market their diversity and their commitment to it, but they also back it up inside their company. And both of these are equally reflected in their campaigns. Some statistics. Now, women and people of color make up 73% of McDonald's total workforce, and 43% of all franchise staff, and 50% of suppliers. 298 of Ronald McDonald Houses of Charity save families of sick children. $250 million in hotel costs actually annually. One great statistic they're very, very proud of is that 90% of their facilitators, or people who work there, and decision makers at McDonald's have actually been promoted from within. And a majority of the senior management presenting at the meetings have been with the company for over a decade, with Pat Harris, a well-known employee, at their head. So one of the more well-known and obvious ethical issues within marketing and advertising is called sexvertising, or using sexuality to sell. Perhaps the most well-known example today in our market is Carl's Jr. Now, if you haven't seen it, I'd like you to take a minute and watch the above video. It's very, very well-known in popular culture. With regards to ethics and leadership, Carl's Jr. is famously brazen in their refusal to pander to its critics. I directly quote from Entrepreneur magazine that the CEO of Carl's Jr. does not care if you find a burger's chain's racy ads offensive. Well, he cares in one respect. If no one is offended, he's going to convince the marketing department to craft an even sexier commercial next time. This is a quote from Carl's Jr. If you don't complain, I go to the head of the marketing and say, what's wrong with our ads? Those complaints aren't necessarily bad for us. What you look at is you look at sales, and our sales go up, end quote. Carl's Jr. and the supermodel-centric marketing strategy, which was originally actually launched in 2005 with the famous commercial of Paris Hilton sensually washing a Bentley in a bikini, is all about bringing you, quote, hungry, young guys, end quote, to restaurants. And actually a recent study, and I'm still quoting from the magazine, found that 52% of viewers surveyed found Carl's Jr. commercial starring bombshell Charlotte McKenzie offensive, but the numbers don't lie. The ad had 2.5 billion earned media impressions before it even ran as a Super Bowl commercial. Now it has more than 4 billion. So Carl's Jr. is obviously not alone in its strategy. Other fast food chains have also begun to actually adopt similar strategies, as well as a plethora of other companies. But these marketing strategies are not without their critics. Likewise, offending audiences is not the only repercussion of actually using gender-based sexism to sell their products. From smallbusiness.com, and I quote, all that exposure has a very significant effect, and the stakes are often more than deciding whether or not to buy a certain product. Women in particular, and we'll talk about this in a second, can suffer some very serious psychological blows from the subtle and pervasive effects of advertising aimed at them. One of which is excessive thinness. Now, according to Anorexia Nervosa and Related Eating Disorders Incorporated, 1 out of every 4 female college students engages in unhealthy means of controlling their weight. This comes in no small part because of advertising commercials depicting excessively thin women. And this is based on heavy amounts of studies. Sexual exploitation, ageism, and a lot of other issues incorporated in using sex to sell. Now, this trickle effect you see throughout gender-based advertising as, and this is not universal, as women are highly exploited sexually using advertising techniques to sell certain products. Now, there are very serious repercussions for not treating diversity advertising with some respect within your company. There is a huge gender gap, for example, in terms of sales and marketing, and that in turns produces an economic gap because of unethical sales and marketing. Now, as you see here, here are 2 equal scooters. The first is red, second is pink sparkle pink. One is priced at $24.99, the other is priced at $49.99. Now, the scooter's price gap is not an anomaly. Recently, the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs compared almost 800 products with female and male versions, meaning that they were practically identical except for the gender-specific packaging. In this case, it's pink and red. And they uncovered a persistent surcharge for one of the sexes, controlling the quality of items marked to girls and women cost an average 7% more than similar products aimed at boys and men. 7%. Now, there's obvious economic repercussions for unethical advertising and marketing, specifically with regards to a lack of understanding and respect for diversity marketing. Researchers from New York City's Department of Consumer Affairs once again poured over children's toys, clothing, apparel, and personal care products throughout the city. And the largest price discrepancy actually emerged in the hair care category, stating that women on average paid 48% more for goods like shampoo, conditioner, and gel. And razor cartridges actually came in second place, costing female shoppers 11% more. Now, Walgreens, for example, peddled a blue box of Schick Hydro 5 cartridges, seen here, for $14.99, and the Schick Hydro Silk, in its purple sibling, was priced at $18.48. So yes, the aforementioned issues are alienating to half of Carl's Jr. and Burger King's consumer public, women. But there are also large economic consequences to marketing and sales with the same prejudice. Now, according to theguardian.com, and I'm quoting, economic inequality for women costs an estimated $9 trillion per year in the developing world, according to a report released last Friday. A combination of low pay, low participation in the workforce, and insecure employment not only drags down women's opportunities in the economy, but also as a global economy as a whole, the report found. According to UN studies, the report actually notes that women comprise 60% of the world's working poor, and that only about half of them participate in the workforce. Now, to compound the problem, a 2014 World Bank report shows that on average, women earn 10 to 30% less than men for comparable work. And this gender equality is actually placed on top of women being charged more for basic products of upkeep, maintenance, and care. Now, is this a marketing issue? Yes, it is. Is it a sales issue? Yes, it is. Is it a company issue and an economic issue? Of course it is. But importantly, and how does it relate back to what we're talking about today? If a marketer sees this happening, they're going to see a number of news articles, backlash, and very, very big human reactions to what the public perceives as a basic inequality, gendered inequality, and diversity inequality in marketing practices, sales practices, and overall company philosophy. So let's complicate the debate even more. Now, the debate on diversity marketing would be incomplete if we did not at least mention, the complicated repercussions of universalizing your audience by stereotype and misnaming it or just simply naming it market segmentation. Now, does customizing based on market segmentation reproduce and reinforce stereotype behavior or sociocultural expectations? That's my question to you as my audience. By reducing humans to categories, do we as marketers do a social injustice beyond the economic issues that we discussed previously? Now, this is a long-winded and nature-nurture debate, one that goes back to birth, essentially, to the birth of men, women, or whatever categories you construct to determine gender. Now, according to CNN.com, which is a study on gendered marketing and product development, and I'm quoting here, when we tell children dolls are for girls and trucks are for boys, we're telling them not only are you a boy or a girl, but that being a boy or a girl is going to determine how you think, act, the skills you develop. All of these are based on research done from the University of Kentucky professor Christia Spears Brown from her book Parenting Beyond the Pink and Blue. Now, these different toys, right, as labeled pink and blue, you'll see a very, very huge similarity to just simply the pink and blue razors that you see as an adult and the pink and red scooters that you saw previously. Now, if you compare and contrast the marketing from birth to adulthood and the price gaps and differences, you'll see that this becomes a larger economic problem than even marketers are responsible for or solving. But in seeing it and knowing what you're marketing, you are responsible for your own set of personal ethics, which is where we come back full circle to the debate that we talked about from the very, very beginning of class. What are your personal ethics? What are your human ethics? And what are your professional ethics? And do they differ? So gendered marketing and sex advertising have many critics, obviously. And with that come many counter campaigns, many culture jammers, many subvertisers, as we talked about before. But none more famous than the Guerrilla Girls. Now, the Guerrilla Girls are actually an anonymous group of feminist female artists devoted to fighting sexism as well as racism within the art world. And this burgeoned out of sexism in actual advertising in corporate America. Now, here you see just an example, just the same as with Greenpeace before, several of their political responses to sex advertising and the economic disadvantages posed to gender groups based on certain institutions' refusal to recognize diversity or the very diversity embedded within their audience. Now, they also address the hypersexualization of women in advertising, which we just talked about. Now, while the Guerrilla Girls actually gained fame and notoriety critiquing art institutions, their work has long recognized inequality in marketing and economics as a primary foundation of a larger economic problem, which we've discussed. That's the reason for activist groups and people who are working to counter campaigns that they see as unethical, intransparent, and inauthentic, which is why this class is actually a vital, vital class to everybody here. People can see and consumers can see through inauthenticity, and if they can't, someone else will, and they will publicize it, and they will create and have the power to create, especially with social media, counter campaigns to campaigns that you may produce and think are viable and with regard to your company's brand, trust, loyalty, and overall perception in the public. And with that, my friends and colleagues, I'd like to thank everyone for their work and their overall participation in the course. I'd like to invite you once again to please check the course website for information regarding your final work and the details about the end of our class, what's due, what you're responsible for. And I'd like to cheers you all. You've done a brilliant job, and I look forward to hearing from you with any questions you may have. Please keep in contact beyond this course. I appreciate your help in making this course a smooth one and all of your questions so far, and good luck in the future.